Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session, Identifying Biases and Privileges in the Field as Library Workers. We're thrilled that you're able to join us today for the Library 2.023 Worldwide Virtual Conference. And I'd like to just extend our thanks to Sam Ringsmith, who is our facilitator or moderator for the chat. So if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We want to make this as interactive because we know that it's best that we learn together as a community of practice. And so you'll see some of the information here. Your audio and videos are turned off, and do not turn them on or play with them. It will interrupt the work we're doing. And feel free to use the chat box and tweet as you like or share out on social media. So we'd like to acknowledge and thank the founding partner, San Jose State University School of Information, for putting this together. And so today we're going to be talking about identifying biases and privileges in the field as library workers, just to give you some ideas to think about the biases and privileges that happen inherently in our society. So first, let's do some introductions. I'll pass it over to Loida to introduce.
Hello, everyone. Hola. Very happy to be here today with my colleague and longtime collaborator, Ray Poon. We are going to talk about a very important topic today. We have many important topics in our field, but this one is one of those that can actually be sort of like a glue. It can bring unity, and we should pay attention to these matters that are kind of also keeping us together during these very difficult and chaotic times that the world is facing. So I'm very happy to be with you. I'm International Library Consultant, ALA past president, and currently I am sharing the Committee on the Status of Women in librarianship for ALA and the United Nations Committee for ALA, and also I'm part of the IFLA governing board, and as the chair of the Management of Library Associations section for IFLA. Right, to you.
Thank you, Loida. I did want to ask you one question. Since you are a world traveler, where are you calling in from today?
I am in Brooklyn, one of the best cities in the world, because I love it. So yes, I'm home. Thank goodness. And so this is a good time to do this program with you. Where are you, Ray?
Thanks. So Brooklyn, it must be 4 p.m. Eastern, and I am
Yes.
currently, I'm supposedly based in California, but right now I received an invitation to be at the Sharjah International Library Conference, which is in Sharjah, United Arab Emirates, and it's 1 a.m. So I am committed to collaborate with you, Loida, every time. And of course, 60 folks here. So I have a flight at 5 a.m. So I might as well stay up. But
Yes. Sleep on the airplane. This is librarian power right here.
it's 16-hour flight back. But folks, feel free to share in the chat box where you're coming from. We look forward to seeing where you all are coming from. So my name is Ray Pun. I am an academic and research librarian at the Alder Graduate School of Education, a teacher residency program in California, where I teach teachers, I manage the library, and it's been an opportunity for me to engage with about 450 pre-service teachers who are graduate students, like Loida, involved in ALA, as well as the Association of College and Research Libraries and the American Association of School Librarians. And so that's our introduction, and we'd like to give you just a second here to introduce yourselves. We see a lot of folks coming all over the United States, right, Loida?
Yes, and I see Canada as well. This is wonderful.
Yeah, thank you all for joining in, and waves back to you. So we're going to proceed to this part, Loida.
Yes. We are going to talk today, as the title implies, about bias. And we have used a very good resource from SIAM, Stop the Stigma Bias. And this is a website that you can consult. So yes, implicit versus explicit. It's very interesting. We have here how these are sort of like in different levels compared to our line of consciousness. Explicit bias refers to attitudes and beliefs that we have about a person or a group on a conscious level. It means that we are fully aware of these, and so they can be self-reported, right? We are kind of like in this conversation that we have. An example of that could be a member of a hate group. And so that's very explicit. It's clear for that person and for everybody else. Then we have the implicit bias. These are unconscious attitudes. These are things that lie below the surface, but may influence our behavior. One example of this is, for instance, assuming that a woman is less competent than a man in a leadership role, right? These are unconscious, these are assumptions. They're different than the explicit, where someone may be a member of a hate group. And so these are some of the examples for us to start us in this session today. And the next one, how the biases and privileges show up. Well, they show up basically in everything we do. From our decisions, our actions, our interactions, and specifically for our field, library instruction, reference services, interactions with community members, collection development and management, search and recruitment processes, the research processes, and more, right? These are some of the examples of what librarians do on a day-to-day basis. But it's important to remember that they are these biases of the decisions, the actions, interactions that we have as librarians. Ray.
Thanks for sharing that. What you just shared also reminded me earlier, for many of you may have attended the keynote session. Dr. Nicole Cook mentioned about her colleague and their experiences writing research on the marginalized experiences for a publication and then getting it dismissed, saying it's not important, it's limited, it's out of scope. And that is a type of bias that exists, certainly. And so I just wanted to add that example because it just came right from the keynote, as many of you are coming in right now. So let's talk about this graphic you see here on the right side, wheel of power and privilege. So this is a diagram labeled the wheel of power and privilege, showing the different degrees to which a person can be marginalized or have power over others in society based on their characteristics. It was created by Sylvia Duckworth, and you can see here there are sort of layers of circles. The locus in the center says power, and then right outside there's a marginalized. So how society is framing power is that these are the characteristics that give opportunities, that allow sort of these biases to default into sort of a preference and sets of privileges that happen. And as a result, they have a lot of implications in how we interact with each other, our communities, collections, so forth. And so in my role as a teacher educator and an educational librarian, I teach my students how to think about their identities as teachers, how to think about their ideas of power and privilege in the classroom, and thinking about equity, meaning who is actually really underserved in the classroom, right? And then thinking about these sort of issues. When I show this graphic, many of them do not realize that maybe they are just socioeconomic, but actually they may be experiencing some other areas that they don't realize. It could be a form of disability, sexuality, skin type, citizenship, right? And so when you look at this kind of graphic as a teaching tool, you begin to see sort of the framing of power and ways to think about those who are identifying in other areas, intersectionality, these sort of interlocking areas where you might have more than one identity that is marginalized. And how do you operate and navigate in society, in a classroom, in a school with these marginalized identities? And so that helps them empathize and think about being responsive in their curriculum and in their teaching, and ensuring that that their pedagogy is responsive to the classroom and identifying this within themselves and within the classroom. So I encourage you to take a look at this kind of graphic, because it's really a great way to understand these sort of powers and privileges that overlap. And so what I do next is we have reflection questions, right? That this is something to think about. We discussed this in the class that I teach with the students, but these are just some of the questions for you all to think about after seeing that graphic, right? We're all educators, even though we might have different roles in the library. So what biases do we carry as instructors, right? How do we think about maybe how we interact with our learners, our students? Is it usually the one who raises their hand a lot or who is the loudest that get our attention, right? And thinking about those who are the quietest. How do we perceive our students and colleagues using that kind of graphic? And then thinking about the scholarship, right? As I mentioned earlier from that example, Loida mentioned about the types of biases that happen in libraries. And then Dr. Cook mentioned the specific example in research. When we think about the research enterprise, how scholarship is developed over time, whose perspective, whose dominant viewpoint exists in scholarship, that is something that I have these conversations with for my students. That includes thinking about the subject terms, the key words, and how they use to describe what they're trying to research, right? And so that way it helps us frame the biases, privileges, and then the marginalized identities. And then a further question is, whose voices are missing in research and scholarship? Because when they're doing research, they're like thinking, well, why aren't there any information about XYZ group, right? And not thinking that their voices are missing because they are often excluded from the research because they're not within that sort of locus of power, right? They don't sort of have those connections. And so that's something that we all need to work together to address and uplift and hopefully really dismantle these kinds of issues that are happening in our system. Now, I want to show you another way of thinking this graphic as a teaching framework. So these are just some other questions to think about, identifying how you bring your identities and positionality into teaching. Positionality is really thinking about your stance in your identities and how you see the world. And then when you reflect with your students holding different identities compared to your own, because that interaction is really key for them to feel comfortable, feel safe, and feel like they have a sense of belonging. And then another area is to think about words and identities that may contain societal stigma, right? And so really addressing that and doing some internal work, as Dr. Maria McCauley said, there's a lot of work that are internal and external values that you have to really think about too. And what advantages do you have as a librarian, right? You're in this position for a reason, you have your expertise, and you have certain privileges and biases. It's inherent. All of us carry biases because of our different upbringings in life. But then how do you check your biases when you're teaching or cataloging or doing collection development or providing research support, and how you interface and interact with people or with materials from different backgrounds, different cultures, right? And so that's something for you to really just like think about, because when you develop some awareness, then that kind of using that kind of graphic, it could potentially unlock opportunities for you to see things differently. Now let's move on to this other concept called information privilege. What is information privilege? This is the other idea that I really like to teach my graduate students who are teachers in training, who unfortunately do not have many librarians in their schools because of the attrition and the budget cuts and so forth. But the idea of information privilege is really rooted in critical librarianship regarding one's affiliation to information. So I'll give you an example. You see here, this is from Duke University's Hannah Rosier, a librarian there, who created this graphic. On one side, it says high school, and on the other side, it says college. And in the center, there's a book bag that says information privilege. So it was actually based on the idea from Peggy McIntosh, who wrote in a 1989 essay called White Privilege. And it looks at everyday situations of examples what information privilege might look like. So it might spark a conversation with your students and within your own self, thinking about accessing information and how you were able to grow up with such information or resources, or maybe you might not have, right? If you look at in high school, this is what we do in our Zoom classes. We talk, did you grow up having databases? Did you have a school librarian? Were you able to feel prepared for college level research, citing, etc.? Because some schools do train their students, and have all these resources, and some do not. I went to a public school in Queens, New York. We had a library, but we did not have a librarian at the time, I believe. Or maybe we did, but it was sort of like a librarian with wearing multiple hats, right? And we definitely didn't have any of these databases and so forth. And then you look at the college side, same situation, right? You are in this higher education context as a student. Can you afford your textbooks, right? And that's the major issue here. If you can, then you have some information privilege because you have advantages, so forth. And maybe you were able to have your own personal computer. You didn't have to, figure out how to borrow the laptop if your library had provided one. So the point is that to look at this graphic and to think about the students' experiences and your own, and just have a really good conversation about it. And so this is what I do with my students. We really reflect and think about their experiences and their placements. So where they're placed within the different district, public, charter schools, etc., unified in California. And then think about the idea of how do they ensure that their students have information access, right? And that they are maybe experiencing some form of privilege, but then maybe their students are not, right? And so there's a lot of that sort of discussion to be had. And so I wanted to pass the next point to Loida.
Yes. So we are going into this work. I will say we should be coming into this very intentional in trying to use all the tools we can to become aware if we are not about our biases, implicit and explicit, right? Because it sounds as if sometimes we talk about this and we talk about it as if everybody understands it and is the default thing, but it's not like that. These are very complicated matters. And so we have some tools and we wanted to share one with you. Is a test and is from the project Implicit Research at Harvard University. And it's the implicit association test. It measures the strength of associations between concepts and evaluations or stereotypes to reveal an individual's hidden or subconscious biases. And yes, it's a test. I will add that we need to go beyond the results that we may obtain, right? These are guides to guide us in the work that we are trying to do with ourselves, right? To be able to kind of have some type of unity to continue the work we're doing with our colleagues, with the communities we serve in these chaotic times that we are living, and when libraries are also under so much attacks, right? I think it's very important to come into this, as I said, intentional, to promote unity, avoid division. And that is one of the steps. It's not the only step, but it's one of the various steps to continue the work we are doing in serving the communities and also supporting each other, which is so important. Right.
Thank you, Loida. So just move on to this last point here, and then we want to have some 10 minutes sort of discussions with you all. So there are many biases. We just shared a couple. Loida mentioned explicit, implicit. There are a lot. There's confirmation bias, there is contrarian bias, et cetera, right? But we wanted to highlight the ones where it really impacts the work that you're doing directly with users, as well as your interactions with your colleagues. And so there are many biases that we hold and it affects our work. And there are a lot of implications if you don't think about them or and really sort of foster that awareness in your workplace and in the communities you serve, then you're going to see some unfortunate issues that will arise, such as microaggression and sort of explicit, direct, inflammatory language, and that could be misconstrued or misinterpreted and so forth. But the idea is that we need to continue recognizing these biases and mitigate them, because if we do not, people will not feel included in the workplace. They won't feel that sense of belonging. They certainly won't come back, or they will find other jobs, right? Or your community members may just not feel comfortable in your library because of what they're seeing or like experiencing that something that doesn't connect with their experiences necessarily, or the biases that they're seeing that's coming from the library. And so at the end, like Loida was saying, we have each other, but it's our responsibility to educate ourselves, right? It is our responsibility to seek out professional resources, that some of the stuff we had mentioned today, and really have that conversation and develop it, because it's a long-term process. It is not, you just do that Harvard test and then you're like done, right? You have no more biases. That's not how it works. It's a long-term process and awareness, because you might have other biases later that you might not aware of. Like that chart has all these different ones. So I wanted to also ask Loida if you have any sort of concluding thoughts.
Yes, I will also want to us to be mindful that, as you said, there are different types of biases, and sometimes us from groups that are vulnerable groups, or from a large library community, have those biases, right? That's what we are getting at today, how we can work with that and get better at living, I will say. And so it's a matter that I will say that if we notice that, or if someone calls that into us, which is very interesting when those things happen, I will say to go into the literature, into the test, perhaps seek support from each other, and look at ways into that we can get better, or learn things that we don't know. And the reason I mentioned this is because there are many times that we don't really know, we're not aware. And but that is not an excuse to perhaps mistreat someone, or select different type of books for a collection, or do research in a different way, as Ray was mentioning. So these are very complex matters, but we are hoping, at least I am hoping, that with this brief introduction today, if someone wasn't aware, or if someone was thinking how to tackle it, they have some tools to get into these matters. And so that will be my kind of suggestion, with a lot of compassion and light and understanding for everyone that is just trying to make it. But it's another way that we can have to impact others, and actually to improve ourselves.
Thank you, Loida. So there was a question here about whether this slide deck is available. So actually it is. So let me drop it in the chat box. Oh, sorry, it's not hyperlinked. Let me see if I can make it hyperlinked. But in any case, we're open to any questions or comments people may have. Please feel free to put in the chat box. We can read your question. We hope you found it useful. I know it's sort of like really quick. Usually these sort of bias trainings are like day long, led by organizational development experts, but we thought there were some sort of nuggets that we wanted to share. Oh, thank you, Adriana. Yeah, so there's the link right there. But yeah.
I mentioned this on the chat, but I want to kind of give a shout out to people from different countries that are joining us. We have at least 3 countries represented here. Obviously, the one we're living in, the US, Canada, our neighbor, and we have Croatia. And that's very interesting because I will think that it's about 9 or 10 p.m. in Croatia. So it's wonderful that we have colleagues from there joining us.
I should say, we want to count 4 because I'm in the UAE right now.
Oh, right. So we have people from 4 countries. That's great. Truly international.
Oh, there's a question here. I think we could take this one from Harry Starr. Thank you for your question. This work can be so difficult as a white, middle-aged, heterosexual male. How do you reach out to individuals and communicate with identities you do not share?
Yes, I will just give an advice. Perhaps if you could connect with there are national library associations of librarians of color, and you don't have to be a member of those groups to be a member or to attend their events. I think that's a good way of um, getting to know people from different populations, different communities with these identities that you do not share. And I will think that's a way of learning more about those communities and learning how to then reach out to those individuals. Ray, do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's really being an ally and really willing to listen and speak up for those who are different from you, who are underrepresented, who you might know that they have marginalized identities, and really being their advocate, because sometimes the biases are in those meeting spaces where if there is someone, for example, studies have shown a woman of color says something, but then a white male says something, people are going to say, oh, that's a great idea, to the white male, but then it was exactly what the woman of color said. So I think recognizing that and then acknowledging and giving credit, right? And saying, instead of saying, oh yeah, that was a great idea I have, instead of saying, no, it's actually so-and-so said this, right? And really being inclusive. So it's not necessarily thinking about your identity as much, but rather like, how do you create that space for everyone to feel they're welcomed and that their presence matter. So I think it's a long process, but hopefully that gives you some starting points. There's another question here from Diane Berkman. How can you get administrators and supervisors to understand white privilege? That is really, really good question here.
This,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, this can take a semester or more. It's a long life. It's probably a lifelong process to understand white privilege if someone, right, was not raised being aware of that. Um, and so, but there's the literature, there are workshops, and obviously those are, you will say, well, yeah, well, those things are always there, but those things do help, and we have to start somewhere. And it is extremely complex, and like I said, it's a lifelong process, but we should not be deterred uh, for trying to help, and not help actually, to educate others. And it shouldn't be our job to educate others, but if it's affecting us at some point in our jobs, then right, how to tackle it. And I will say to share literature, and there are community organizations that perhaps are presenting workshops in this area if they're local. That's another way of connecting with them, see how we can get some buy-in from different administrators, right, to involve this one administrator, or if it's the top, how we can do that if we in the staff or the people under this administrator work together. It's we have barely no time left, and I'm just hoping that that helps somehow.
I totally agree. It's a long process to discuss it. I think the framing is how to be anti-racist and really addressing those issues too. And thinking about the realities of injustice that happens and really sharing that openly, if there's that space, right, where they're willing to listen. If they're not, it's really, really impossible, right, to get them through. But to really have dialogue and empathy, and then sort of get to the point where that some people have privileges, right, and so forth, and then getting to that dialogue. It requires vulnerability, and that takes time to build that trust. But I know we're about time at 1:30. We really want to thank everyone here for attending and hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Thanks for making time. And we hope to see you in person or in Zoom next time.
Thank you so much, everyone. We should have a whole day of this because there are so many questions. Thank you so much.